preheat your ovens 450 degrees, blind bake the crust at 450 degrees for 12 to 15 minutes. We all know that cooking is never time and baking is never time, and I'm going to show you what to look for at that point. Roll out the pie crust and line a 9-inch pie plate, and with a fork, poke holes in the bottom and the sides of the crust to prevent air bubbles from forming. So we're just going to do that. Doesn't have to be too much, about, I don't know, every inch or so. You get an idea, right? And then just on the sides as well, about every inch. Again, just to make sure there's no air pockets from forming. We're going to take a piece of parchment paper. Be a little bit liberal with your parchment paper because we're going to trim it off to create a little bit of edge so we can grab the parchment after it's been baked, so we can easily take our pie weights out, whatever pie weights you're using. So I tear off more than I need, put it on top of the pie pastry. And if you're using something like rice or beans or whatever, I don't fill it too much. I want the majority of that weight to be on the bottom. I'm not too concerned about the sides too much, so I just pour some on. And I'm probably going to fill it about halfway full is what I do. I'm using rice and then just lifting up my parchment to make sure that the rice can get all the way across the diameter of the bottom of that pie crust. Make sure there's no wrinkles in that parchment so it can go all the way to the edge. And we're going to trim that parchment just a little bit so we don't have all this excess sticking up in the oven. You don't want to fill it all the way up. I find if you fill it all the way up to the top, you create more weight than you need to, and you have more of a chance of that bottom crust sticking a little bit to the parchment when you pull it off. Grab a pair of scissors, and again, don't trim too much off because you're not going to have anything to grab when it comes time to get the weights out. So I leave it probably about 1.5 inches to 2 inches all the way around the pie, and that's going to also help protect the upper side crust a little bit. So that's what it should look like in the end. I have about a half full, right? I got lots of parchment paper to still grab onto. It's going to protect the top edge of the crust just a little bit, and we're going to pop that in that 450 degree oven and set a timer for 12 to 15 minutes. As we mentioned, cooking and baking is never time. What you're looking for is you're looking for the top edge around the edge of the pie plate to be browned, to be golden. You're looking for the bottom. It's not going to be golden underneath the parchment paper. You lift up the parchment paper to check because it's not exposed to the heat of the oven. It's all covered with rice or beans or lentils or whatever, right? So it's going to seem a bit doughy, and that's fine. But what you're looking for, you're going to press, you're going to make sure it's somewhat firm. Best way to describe it. If you're using a glass pie plate like I'm doing, you can also have that visual on the outside to see how much brown it is of the part that's touching the pie plate. But I'll show you mine. 12 to 15 minutes. I mean, all depends how hot your oven's running. Maybe your oven runs a little bit hot. You know that, right? Maybe it runs a little bit cool. Then it would go to 15. Maybe you're not using a pie crust from scratch. You're doing one from the store. Then definitely, probably more like 10 to 12 minutes to blind bake it because it's going to be really thin. It's all these variances. So I'm going to show you what you're looking for with mine, and then we're going to take the pie weights out by grabbing that parchment and just let it cool. So you're going to want to have a bowl standing by that you're not making a big mess all over the countertop, so that when that crust is done, we can easily lift the parchment, have all the pie weights in there, and just place it in here so it can sit there to cool. Never place it in that bag. You know, I have my bag for saving my blind baking ingredient. Never place them there without it being fully cool first. You have to let it sit room temperature overnight, whatever, because if you put it in there, number one, it's just screaming hot, it's going to burn the bag. Number two, even if it's warm, it's going to create condensation in there. It's going to go moldy. So just let it sit out overnight, and then you can just bag it and tag it for whenever you're blind baking pie crust, okay? So I'm going to show you this. So we're looking for a nice golden crust on the top, which I got. I'm happy. I'm lifting up the parchment. You know, a little bit is sticking to the parchment from the pastry. Not a lot. You're always going to get a little bit, but you can touch it and it should be somewhat firm on the bottom, and it is. It's still going to be soft. It's not going to be golden on the bottom. Remember, it's completely covered with our pie weight and the parchment. It's not going to be all the way firm, but what we're trying to do is create that crust. So if you have a glass pie plate, you can go over and look to see if it's golden. Mine just seems a little bit soft. And again, unless I'm there actually touching it, you're never really going to know for sure. So your best bet is to just do this more often. So the more often you blind bake, the better you're going to get at it. You know exactly what you're going to look for. I'm going to put mine in for another, I think, 3 minutes. If your top crust around the edge looks really dark, then you're probably fine. And I would pull it out. Here we go. So again, we're looking for the nice golden crust on the top around the edge. I'm lifting it up, touching it. It feels more firm, looks great. The crust is nice and golden all the way across the top. I'm looking at the sides. It's more golden. I'm gonna stop right there. And you'll see the edges of the parchment have gone a little bit brown, so they're very brittle. So you do need a fair amount to grab onto to successfully just lift it out and put it in a bowl without spilling rice in your pie, without spilling rice all over the countertop. And then you just let that sit there overnight until that's fully cool before you put it and seal it in your blind bake bag. And that's my bag that I have standing by. And what you have in the end is a perfectly cooked bottom crust for a pie, okay? I got one little bit of crust that fell off. I'm gonna eat it. Oh, it's so good.